Hi everyone, my name is Maximilian Schwarzmüller, and in this video I'm releasing content from the first two sections of my 5-star rated 13 hours Angular 2 course I got on Udemy. After this video, you should be able to create your very first basic Angular 2 applications to set up your development environment, and you should have a basic knowledge about components, templates, and what makes up an Angular 2 application. If you then want to learn more or dive deeper, I would be very happy to welcome you in this course as well, of course, as in all the other videos I got on this channel. I wish you a lot of fun with the content and, well, let's get going. Hi everyone, welcome to this course. I'm very happy to have you here. Throughout this course, I will give my very best to teach you everything about Angular 2 to get you really started and get you into the position to start writing awesome Angular 2 applications. Now, what qualifies me to do that? I work with Angular 2 since quite some time. I started when it was in the alpha, of course, now it's in the beta, and I'd say I have quite a profound knowledge of Angular 2. I enjoy working with JavaScript and frameworks like Angular 2, and I also enjoy teaching. That's something I've done a lot throughout my life. For example, you may also check out my YouTube channel, Mindspace Tutorials, if you're interested in more tutorials and see what I do. But that's just a side note. So in this course, it's all about Angular 2. Therefore, at the end of this course, you'll be in a good position to actually create Angular 2 applications. This course is structured such that we learn all the fundamental building blocks of an Angular 2 application, all the theory and how to apply it. We have a lot of practical examples. In later stages of the course, we'll create a real application, which is more advanced than all the examples in the different sections and which will allow you to train all the concepts you learned in the sections before this. But before we do that, we'll begin in this section with, well, the question, what is Angular 2, why we use TypeScript and what TypeScript is, and of course, how to set up our development environment. Now, I know most of you just want to get started, and we will do so in section 2, where we dive into components, which are the key building block of any Angular 2 application. Thereafter, we'll learn more about data binding, which is how we can work with data in an Angular 2 application, how we can manipulate and change the DOM and pass data around in our application, a very key concept. Thereafter, we'll talk about directives, learn what directives are and how we use them, how we create our own ones, and how we can, again, manipulate the DOM with directives. Thereafter, it's time to have a look at services, which allow us to centralize certain parts of our application and access it from several points in our application, so to say. After learning more about services, we'll have a look at forms in Angular 2 and see which awesome tools Angular 2 provides us to make working with forms really simple. Because, working with forms is really an everyday task of every developer. After having learned more about forms, we'll learn about pipes, which are little helpers in Angular 2 which allow us to transform data we output to a view. We'll see how handy those pipes are to easily transform data or outputted data. And thereafter, we'll have a look at routing in HTTP and see how we can set up a router to, route between different blocks in our application, different routes, of course. And with HTTP, we'll be able to leave our application and access data or whatever on another server. So a lot of content we got here, and I'm very excited to get into it. I'm sure you are too, so let's get started. Hi everyone. Let's take a moment to talk about the architecture of an Angular 2 application. Because understanding and knowing that architecture is a key thing when becoming an Angular 2 developer. Angular 2 follows a certain philosophy or, architecture when it comes to building up applications with it. Basically, an Angular 2 application is very modular. We have a lot of modules, something that TypeScript supports really well, that hold the different parts of our application. And the Angular 2 framework itself also consists of a lot of packages or modules. That is, we have to export and import certain functionalities or classes when we're interacting with different modules. So we might have a module with a component and we might have another module with a component. Now, if we want to use component A and component B, we will have to export the class, the JavaScript class, in module A and import it in module B. We will see this in the course and it's really easy to do. It's just important for you to understand that this modularity is a key thing in an Angular app or in an Angular 2 application. Everything is modular there. Now, these modules, as I said, hold different things. One very important thing that makes up every Angular 2 application are components. We will have one or multiple components that kind of, really structure our application. You can think of it like an HTML document where you have a header, then a main section, and the main section might have a sidebar, and then a content section, and then you have a footer at the end. That are certain sections or components on your web page as well, right? Now, Angular 2 works the same way. You define components and then you build up your application with these components. And these components are able to be siblings, or you're able to nest those components into each other, and they are able to communicate with each other. To make sure that you're able to use these components, you can give them selectors, which is basically a name, and then you embed that name in HTML tags, so in a greater and smaller sign, in your HTML code. That will be how you include components. And of course, we will see that very detailed in an extra video. But just that you know, you create your application from different components which you build together and which you can obviously reuse. And that's the great benefit, the reusability, the scalability, and that it's very easy to maintain, since you make up your app from these reusable parts. Like you probably already know it from server-side frameworks where you might use rendering engines like Blade and Laravel or Smarty, where you also have certain includes or components and then you put them together. So we have these components that live in modules that we can put together and build our app up from. Now, components are just directives. If you have an Angular 1 background, you might already know directives, but if you don't, that's no problem. Directives are basically just instructions living in the HTML code that tell Angular 2 to transform the piece of code, the HTML element, for example, where they sit on, into something else. Well, it depends on the directive what to do. Components are such a directive, but they don't live in an HTML element. They are kind of an HTML element themselves, specified by the selector we give them. Now, we embed components in the code, and when Angular 2 runs over this line of code, it will know, okay, that's a component, I have to insert something there. That something will be the view attached to a component or the template of that component. And that is the difference, or that is why components are a directive, but they are a special directive, a directive which holds a view. A normal directive will just hold instructions how to transform the element it sits on. A component is not only such an instruction, it has a view, and this instruction is always swap out the selector and put in that view. So components are directives with a view attached to them. We make a component as well as we create a directive by taking a JavaScript class and attaching metadata to it. This metadata will hold certain information like what is the selector, what is the template, which directives do I want to use in that template. That will tell Angular 2, okay, this class is a component or is a directive or is whatever. And now the configuration for this component, directive, whatever, is inside this metadata we attach. So we have JavaScript classes plus metadata equals component, directive, whatever. And then we take these components, directives, whatever, and build up our apps from it, because they are, again, modular. Another very important thing are services. Services are also JavaScript classes, which we turn into service by attaching metadata, or we make them injectable by attaching metadata, to put it that way. And then we can do exactly that, inject them into other components or directives. So a service might hold some functionality that we want to access from different places throughout our application, like from component A and component B. Now, instead of writing that function we might have in that service in component A and B, and therefore duplicate our code, we outsource it into this, service, this class, and then we take this service and inject it into component A and B. And then both components are able to use the functionality provided by this service. So service is also a key thing in Angular 2 applications, holding certain data or functionality that we store in this kind of centralized place that we can then use throughout our application. So that's the architecture of an Angular 2 application, having these modules with components that make up our application, directives which change the DOM, services which kind of stores central parts of our application that are usable in different places of our application and that are injected into those places or modules. And that is kind of the core philosophy of an Angular 2 application. This modularity, these building blocks, and the reusability. And we will see this throughout this course. It's just important that you got your first feeling on how this architecture looks like and how an Angular 2 application works. See you in the videos. Bye. To develop Angular 2 applications, we need to create a certain development environment or workspace with which we will work throughout this course. Now, this workspace is really easy to set up. Indeed, I actually prepared it for you already. But there are two things we will have to do or to install on our machines to be able to use this workspace and especially use TypeScript. So these two things are Node.js, or there specifically we need the Node Package Manager, NPM, which is the tool which will allow us to first install and update all our dependencies of our projects, and secondly, which will help us with the compilation of TypeScript and the setup or the starting of a little server which serves our files and which will automatically update our browser tab so that we can always see the most recent status of our application. And that's a very handy thing, especially the compilation of the TypeScript is not only handy but required, so we will need that. And the other thing is obviously, TypeScript. The TypeScript compiler, which we need to install in our system so that we can use it throughout this project. Let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to search for Node.js. And on their website, you want to download the latest major and dependable version here for your system. So either if you're on Mac, you download it, or Windows 2, so it's available for all systems. And then you just download this, save it to wherever you like. And once it's downloaded, let me get it over here. You really just want to follow through all these steps here. That's really easy. Now I already have it installed, therefore I'm not going to go through this installation process, but it's, really simple. Next thing is, now we got it installed, we need to make sure that we have the most recent version of NPM, this package manager, which is the only reason why we're using Node here, right? So to do this, you want to fire up a terminal. Again, on Windows, just open the command line. On Mac, you use your terminal app. And then what we want to do in this terminal here is, on Mac, we type sudo, on Windows we don't, and then on both systems, we follow up with npm install npm-g. Now you hit this and then you enter your password, your admin password on Mac. And again, on Windows you don't need that sudo command. So this is now running, and this makes sure we have the latest version of npm. Now after that we want to type npm-v to check which version we have, and that seems pretty good. Good, so now we got npm installed. The next thing is we need TypeScript. To do this, well, we'll Google for it, TypeScript. And then it's the first result here, typescriptlang.org. And when we click on Get TypeScript Now, we're taken to this little command here, which we just copy and then enter into our still open terminal here. And now I'm not going to execute it because I have TypeScript installed, but you just hit enter and this will install TypeScript. And it's the same on Windows and Mac. You don't need to execute this command. This is just for compilation, which we're not doing manually. We will let npm or specifically gulp handle this. Okay, now so that's that. We have all the tools we need. Now we need the actual workspace. You will also find attached to this video a description, a PDF document, which will guide you through this whole installation process. Now the last step we have to do is actually set up our workspace. So the files we're going to use to write our Angular 2 application. This is really easy. Attached to this video, you'll find a file called Workspace Manual Installation. Download this file and well, save it basically anywhere. And then you want to extract this file. What I'm going to do is I'm just getting this on my desktop. Okay, so here is my folder. First, I'm going to rename it to, let's say, Angular 2 app. The name is purely up to you, obviously. And the next thing is we have to install all our dependencies like, well, the Angular 2 framework itself and a couple of other dependencies. We do this by, well, opening up our terminal again if we haven't already. And in this terminal, you want to navigate to this folder. Inside this folder, we then have to run npm install, and this will install all the packages we need. Now this might take a couple of seconds, and you might see some errors throughout this process, but that is not really a problem because that only means that some things had to be recompiled maybe. In the end, it should finish without an error, and I will see you then. So my installation just finished, and this is how it should look like on your machine too. No errors. Warnings are okay, and now we're good to go. Now I'm still inside this folder here in my terminal, and now I type npm start. What this will do is it will, well, compile the files and start our light server and the gulp process, which will watch all our files and recompile them whenever we change something there. Now this will open up a new browser tab, specifically this one here. And you might see that loading text here. Well, that only means that basically the light server started before compilation was finished for the first time. Just hit the refresh button and you should see our Hello World welcome page. And this is the point where we will begin in all our future lectures. By the way, if you always want to have the most recent state of this workspace, you might also clone it from my Git repo, to which you will find a link in the PDF document attached to this video. Okay, now we're all good to go. See you in the next videos. Bye. Hi everyone, we successfully set up our workspace in the last video. Now I want to explain a little bit about, well, the folder structure or the overall workspace structure we're using throughout this course, so that you're really ready to get started. This is the, well, boilerplate as it was installed in the last video, no matter if you were following the full or the manual approach. In the end, you should have this folder structure here. And let me tell you what each of these folders does. Well, the app folder here, that is just a folder where our compiled TypeScript files will be moved to. So we don't change anything here. That is the code that will actually get executed in the end, because we're writing in TypeScript. This will get compiled to JavaScript, and the JavaScript code will then get executed. But we're not touching these JavaScript files. It's just our output directory. The assets folder contains the SCSS code. Now, if you don't want to use SCSS, you can write normal CSS code in there too. This will just transpile it to, well, normal CSS code and add handy features like, well, first of all, you can use SCSS. Second of all, it will also auto prefix it and so on. So very handy to use this in development, but you don't have to if you don't want to. The dev folder now contains our TypeScript files. So this will be the folder structure in which we will work most of the time because, well, there we write all our logic, all the TypeScript logic, all our real Angular 2 application files. And here we got this app component file, which is the very first component, this hello world view we see, and at the same time, which is the root component of our project. Now, I'm not going to dive into into components here. This will be done in the component section. So just, this is our first component which renders the first page to the screen we're seeing here, the hello world page. It is started by this boot.ts file, which starts up our application. And again, this will be explained in later videos in more detail, but just this is our boot.ts file. And this is how it will look throughout this course. We will make some adjustments from time to time, but in general, that is the way it will stay. Now, I noticed that some people had an error that a .ts file ending was added to this import, and then this would crash the app and it would not work anymore. Make sure your import looks like this: app component from app.component. No .ts at the end, very important. The Node modules folder holds all the packages and dependencies we're going to use throughout this course, or we need to develop Angular 2 applications, and obviously this will include Angular 2 framework, but also some other dependencies. Now, when we're deploying our app, we won't ship this whole folder, but I will bring out a specific section about deployment in the future. Just that you will find it later. The source folder, which will hold our compiled CSS files. So as with TypeScript in the dev folder, which is compiled to the app folder, our SCSS files, which live in the assets folder here, will be compiled to CSS, which will then be stored in the source folder. So this source folder is also something we don't touch. Well, the typings folder, you can mainly ignore it. That contains some info for TypeScript to correctly identify and use certain types, so to say. Now, all these other files here basically provide some configuration to our project to allow our IDE to correctly work, to give TypeScript some information to not throw certain compilation errors, and so on. So that is really what's inside these files. So I hope this clears this up a bit and allows you to get started really good and quick. See you in the next videos. Bye. Hey everyone, another introductory video here, very short. I just want to move through this index.html file here, where, well, we see certain imports and a certain configuration. Now, just so that you know what all this stuff means here. It's a basic HTML skeleton, and as you might be aware, with Angular 2, we create single-page applications. So technically, this HTML file is the only HTML file ever sent from the server to our browser, the only HTML file which we will render in the browser, so to say. And then we're manipulating this file through Angular 2. So we got our basic HTML skeleton here, and the first important thing is this baseref tag here. What this does is it sets the base URL, so to say, of our application to, in this case, the root directory, therefore it's slash. What this means is that in our case, we're serving files from localhost, and we don't serve it from localhost slash mycoolapp or localhost slash anything. We're serving it from localhost slash nothing else. So from the root directory on this domain. And therefore, we're setting this to just a slash. Now, if you were to host this app on your server, and there you had like example.com slash myAngular2app, you would have to enter slash myAngular2app slash into this base tag. And this tag is important for routing to let Angular 2 know where our actual root is. That's very important. Okay, then title and so on. Then we got several imports here, and this will probably change as Angular 2 matures. But as of now, these are several polyfills we have to import to make it work on Internet Explorer and so on. Then we have our system .source.js file, which is system.js, which again is our file loader, and I will come back to that in a second. Then we have our X.js, which will enable us to use observables. Observables is a concept we will see when we're working with HTTP, and we will see this in a later section, but this our X.js import here is important for us to well use that and basically use HTTP in Angular 2 without using promises. But we will see this in a later section, just so that you know what this import does. Now the next three imports are Angular 2 specific. It's the core package, then some router specific modules and HTTP specific modules. Theoretically, we would not need the latter two one if we were not using routing or HTTP, but I already included them here so that we don't have to do this once we're in the specific sections in this course. Good, then now we're just including our main style sheet, the app CSS file, and then we're in the body where we have this my app loading tag. My app is our root component, the app component, and my app is really just a selector of this component to let Angular 2 know where to render this component. We will see this when we're in the component section, but this is basically how we start up or implement our application. Below that, we have another script block here. And here we're loading all the files we need for our application with system.js. And now I'm obviously not talking about dependencies, we're doing that up here, but about the files we write. And here we're basically setting the folder where these files are to be found, the app folder, where I said our compiled JavaScript files will live in, and well, the default extension and so on. And we also say at the beginning, please import this app boot file, which is the bootstrap file which will fire up all our application. And all other files will then be loaded dynamically when we need them. So this is our setup, this is our index.html. And I think you should now be good to go to really understand with what we're working here. And the next step is to understand what we do in an Angular 2 application, how it works. And we'll start with components. See you in the next videos then. Bye. Hey, after all the theory, we're finally writing some code in this lecture. If you watched my architecture video, and you really should to have a deeper understanding of all the fundamentals behind Angular 2, you know that an Angular 2 application consists of several components. So building blocks from which we build up our application and which we combine to create our website, our application in the end. Now, in this whole section, we'll have a look at those components, how to create components, how to configure components, and how to let components interact with each other, because we'll have more than one component in most of our applications. But let's start with the very basics, with just one component. Let's create one. Now, in my development environment, the way we set it up in the last video, and in here, I already got a component, this app.component.ts, TS stands for TypeScript. This file holds a complete Angular 2 component. So this file has everything which defines the basics of an Angular 2 component. And indeed, it is this component that we're seeing in this screen here, where we see the hello world. The hello world here is the text which is shown or which is inserted in our template here, the template of our component here. So this might look a bit strange here, probably does if you're new to Angular 2, and you probably are if you're watching this course. And you don't know it if you have an Angular 1 background either, because this is pretty new and this is the core of Angular 2, this component-based modular approach. That is the reason why you can read a lot in the internet that there is a big difference between Angular 1 and Angular 2. And it is this component-based approach that really sets apart Angular 2, or that is the fundamental core of Angular 2. Now, obviously, there are more building blocks to Angular 2 and we'll cover them all, but it's really important to understand this component-focused concept. Now, in my opinion, such a component-based orientation makes sense, because if you look at the way you create websites or you style your websites, when we're just talking about HTML and CSS, then you're probably having a header and a main container, and you have different sections with articles in this container, then you have a footer at the bottom. So you're already using components in this way. You're dividing your page up into several building blocks. And if you're using a templating engine, when you're coming from, let's say, a server-side background, when you're have some experience using PHP or anything there, then you probably used a templating engine to build up your views from several building blocks. So this is really the same concept here in Angular 2. This is this component-based approach. And in the next video, we'll dive a little bit deeper into this component and we're going to build our own component. See you there. Hey, so this is the component we looked at in the last video. Our basic component our application ships with. Now what makes this a component? Down here we got a default class, a default TypeScript class, which will then be compiled to JavaScript, as I told you in the TypeScript video, for example. We're exporting this class to say, hey, this is a class which should be available and usable in other files, so to say, too. So this is this modular approach I was talking in the architecture video. Angular 2 consists of modules. Everything is packed into modules, so to say, and we make things available outside of a module. This file is a module here, for example, by exporting things like this class, and then we will be able to use this class outside of this file. So this is where we define a class, and as you can see, this class doesn't contain any logic here. It's completely empty class, no properties, no methods. So that's definitely not doing anything here, but we're making this a component by firstly importing component. Let me zoom in a little bit here. Importing component from Angular 2 core, from this package here, from this module. So as we're exporting our app component class here, you can say component is just another class exported in this module, and we're importing it here so that we can use it here. Now, where are we using it? You probably already saw it. We have this add component thing here. Now, what's that? App component is a TypeScript decorator. This add something part here is a TypeScript decorator which adds some metadata to our JavaScript class. And this decorator obviously is compiled to JavaScript too, but it's very nice to write in TypeScript. You have it always beginning with this add, and then the name of the decorator or of the metadata which should be added to the class, in this case this component metadata here, which really is just this JavaScript object we're passing as an argument, you could say here in the parentheses. And inside this JavaScript object, so between those curly braces, we're configuring our component, our app component here. And we got a lot of configuration options. Here we're only using 2, but there are a lot more, and we will learn about all those options throughout this course, obviously. Now let's begin with the 2 we are seeing here. We got a selector metadata attached to our component, which basically says, okay, this component can be used in an HTML file by using an HTML tag which contains app. So by using this HTML tag, we can then embed this component into the HTML. And that is a so-called directive. It's not a default HTML tag, as you can probably tell. It's a custom tailored HTML tag. And Angular 2 scans our document for example for those tags. It also scans for other directives it knows. And then when it finds this tag, it knows, I know this. That's a component. I know it because I have specified the selector here. And I know what to do with that. I will have to insert the template instead of those app tags. And the template is specified here. Now the template here really is just a string, right? We're just outputting hello world here, and that is again the text we're seeing here. Now we could also link to an external document here by using template URL. Then we would have to specify the path to an HTML file. We would use this, and we will use this in this course when we have like bigger templates, which would be really unnecessarily big here in our JavaScript or in our TypeScript file, and which we want to have a separate file so that this TypeScript file here stays clean and doesn't have like 50 lines of HTML code mixed in, although it would be perfectly possible. You don't have to have a short string here. You can expand this template over several lines. And let me do this, for example, here, so that we can actually see how we can change the output of our application. I will use 2 backticks here. So those aren't quotation marks, that are backticks. And what these backticks do is they allow us to have a multi-line string. So now we can't just write between these backticks like it was one single block of a string variable, and we don't have to make sure that we get the line breaks correctly. So I can now use, let's say, an h1 tag here. This is a test. Let me close it. And below that, I want to have a paragraph where I will just have some dummy lorem ipsum text. And if you're not using any editor where you can quickly insert lorem ipsum like I do here by just hitting lorem and then hitting tab, well, you might insert any text, whatever you like. The text isn't really the important thing here. Now let me save this, and you should see down here, you should see that your Gulp workflow is updating, that he's starting the build TS process and that he's successfully finishing it. Now let's have a look at our website. And as you can see, it got updated with our new "this is a test" and the dummy text. Now, okay, so we got our component, and as said, we have the selector, which we then enter into an HTML file, and Angular 2 finds this selector and then replaces it with whatever we specify here in our template. Okay, now where is this HTML file we're embedding it? Well, it can only be one, because we only have one HTML file in this whole folder here, or in this whole project here, and that's the index.html file. Let's have a look at this one in the next video, because we will have some basic configuration there and in this mysterious boot.ts file, which will really get our application running. See you in the next video. Bye. Back we are. We changed our app component here, but until now we don't really know how this whole thing gets loaded up in the first place, right? Now let's have a look at our index.html file. We're now in our body section, and here we can see our app tags. So the app tags we're setting up here in the provider, where we're actually seeing them here. Let me just zoom in. So that is where our component gets embedded into our index.html. And now there are 2 important things here. The first thing is this app component will be our root component, and all our Angular 2 applications will have one such a root component. All other components will be somehow nested either in the parent-child or in sibling connections within this app component. So all our components will be a child to our app component, and the components then amongst themselves, they can be siblings too, but we will only have one root level component here, which is the app component. So this is the first important thing, that we have this hierarchy and that we have this root component. The second thing is, okay, we're inserting it here, and this will kind of, you load it. But we need to load our JavaScript files too. And or our application itself, we need to load that too, so that we're actually able to insert something here. And we're doing this in our boot.ts file. This file gets imported here, app boot. So if you rename this boot.ts to main.ts, you will have to change this to main. And what it basically does is this is the first file that gets executed. Otherwise, no file would run or no JavaScript would be running at the beginning of our application when we first fire up index.html. Now in this boot.ts, there has to be something which gets our whole application going. And we have two imports here. The first one is the bootstrap method from our Angular 2 module. And that's a core method. This method will, like the name says, bootstrap our application. It will start up our application. The second import is our app component. Now here you can see we're importing app component from our app.component file, which is this file. And here we're exporting this class. We could not import it if we would not export it here. And then we're just using this bootstrap method we're importing here. And we're passing one argument, which is our root component, the component we want to bootstrap, so to say, the component with which we want to start up our application. So we're passing our app component as an argument, and this will set up and start up our application and will take care that we can see what we're actually seeing here. In the next video, we will write our own app component. See you there. Bye. Hey, so I'm now back and we learned how to set up our root component, how to bootstrap it, how to get our application starting, and we had a little look at our template. In this video, we're going to create our own component. So let's do this. I'll do it right here in my dev folder. As I said, this will be where all our TypeScript code and all our components, modules, whatever we will create, all of that lives in this dev folder and its sub-folders. So let me create the my component. And now the naming convention of our files here is to name them first the name of our component, then a dot, then component, then just the file ending ts for TypeScript. And this is now the basic file for my component. Now the first thing we need to do here, let me zoom in, to make this work is we need to import component from Angular 2, to core. Now this will enable us to use that component decorator, this metadata I showed you in the app component. Second thing is I will create a class and I will export it so that it is available outside of this module. So I'll export a class here, which I will name my component. And normally you shouldn't have that component thing here. So what you would have like a contact list component or a contact detail component, right? Just the component here happens to be called my component. So this is the component class and I don't need to add anything there as of now. The next thing I will add though is the decorator so that we can attach the metadata to our component here. So I will use @component, then have parentheses and then squared bracket, curly braces inside the parentheses. So we create a JavaScript object in this in these parentheses here. And now inside here, we're doing all the configuration for our component. Now, as I said, we have a lot of options what we can configure there, right? First thing is we'll create our selector, so the HTML tag by which we can embed this component. And this should also reflect the name of our component. So I will call it my component with a dash between the my and component. Then we will have a template here. And I will again use my backtick notation to have multiple lines available. And I will just output, this is my component for now. And this is for the moment all for our own component. As you can see, it's pretty similar to our app component because yeah, it is just another component, right? Now we use this component in our app component because, as I said, this is our root component and we only have one root component. So all other components will have to somehow live in this app component. So we're doing this here by just, let me get rid of this paragraph here. Then I have another heading here which says, now comes the second component, and below here I will use my the selector I just created. So I will enter my component here to insert my component. Now if we have a look at our web page, we're not seeing the text I entered there. Remember, I had this is my component. Well, it's not showing up here. So something is not working here. Well, at the moment we're inputting our component here, we're embedding it into our HTML. But just as with the index HTML and the app tag here, where we had to start it in our Bootstrap file, our app component does not know what my component should be. We have to kind of bootstrap it here. We have to tell our app component how to embed something which has this tag. We do this by adding another configuration here. So we have selector, we have template. Now comes another one which is very important. This is called directives. Now directives takes an array, and in this array we will list all directives, and remember, components are directives, just that they have a template attached to them. So in this array here we will define all non-default built-in directives, and our components aren't built into Angular 2, that we will need in this template or in this component for it to work correctly. So in this case I will import the my component, and now my IDE automatically added this import statement up here. But make sure you do have this import statement too. So you need to import my component from my component.component, so from this file, right? You need to have this import statement for it to work. Now let me save this. And now you can see we got this is my component text. Now to make things a little bit easier, I will just quickly rearrange this here so that we now get this side by side. And I will keep this for all the other videos in this course. Now this is how we create our own component, how we embed it, and how we use it with this directives configuration. Now obviously outputting just static text is not that exciting and probably not what you will be doing in your applications. Therefore, in the next video, we will have a look at the various template expressions we can use in Angular 2 to alter our template, to insert data dynamically. See you there. Bye. Okay, until now we have created our own component, we have embedded it, we have set it up with the directives configuration. So we got a little bit into how we use those components to create our app. And I hope you can already think how we would have like a header component and a main component, and how we could compose our application by just embedding them with our HTML tags, inserting them into our directives array, and building up our app with these building blocks. Now, as I promised, we're now going to have a look at how we can actually output data or content in general by using our template expressions. So certain expressions to alter our DOM. And we will do this in this video. Let's start by outputting some text. Let's say in my component here, I have a property called name, which is, well, in my case, Max. You might enter whatever your name is. I want to output this name somewhere here. So I want to say like, hi, I'm, and then I want to have my name here. Now the syntax for this in Angular 2 is to have double curly braces, I'm name. And this will refer this name here to this property. So it has to be the same. And these double curly braces tell Angular 2 to replace whatever is between them with the result of the expression it finds there. So this could also be like a condition or a function, like a calculation. But in this case, it's just referring to this property. So it will output the value of this property. Now, let me save this. And you can see here, I am Max. So this is exactly what this expression here does. And this is how easy it is to output information or data in your Angular 2 templates. Awesome, right? Now let's expand the sentence a little bit by saying, and this is my very first Angular 2 component. It's so awesome. Now let's say we want to give us a possibility to say if it's awesome or not. And if we say, hey, it's awesome, well, we want to, let's say, highlight our name and give this it's awesome some different styling just to showcase how we can dynamically influence our DOM, our HTML here. Now to do this, I'll first add a line break here. So it's just a BR tag here. And then I will have like, let's add another one. Then I have the question here. Is it awesome? Question mark. And I will have an input element here of type text where I can then enter, let's say, yes. And if I enter yes, I want to do this special highlighting. And if I enter anything else, well, then nothing will happen. Now to make this happen, first I will attach some styling to my template here, that I have some special classes I can attach and detach to my document, depending on whether I said it's awesome or not. So we will add a new decorator here, or a new metadata, that's more correct, which is called style URLs. And this takes an array of paths leading to different CSS files. Now this can only be one, but we could specify 5 or 10 or 100 if you would like. So, don't forget the comma here. The other way of doing this would just be to use styles. This would also take an array, but in this array we would have strings with the content of the style sheet in the string. So it's the same with template. We could have template or template URL, but only singular because there is only one template or one template HTML file. And here we have styles or style URLs, so plural, because we can have multiple styles or style sheets. Now I'll use an external sheet here. So I'll have style URLs, and they will live in my source folder under CSS, and I will call this my component.css. Now this file doesn't exist yet, so let me create it here, and I'm using SCSS. So I'm creating an SCSS file here, but if you want to use plain old CSS, you just go in the source folder and you create this file by your own or on your own and just enter the CSS coding you need there, right? So let's say for this thing here, I want to be able to add a class which is called isAwesome. I don't seem to be able to type today. isAwesome, and this will have a font weight of bold, so it will be a bold text, and I will give it a red color. So that's all I'm doing here, just saving this. And now back in my component here, I want to, as I said, conditionally attach and detach this class. So let's say I want to format that it's so awesome part of my text and give it this isAwesome class, well, if we enter yes into this input field. Therefore, I will wrap it into a span element so that I can give it some formatting. I'm not doing anything here yet. First, I will go to my input element and I will add hashtag input element. Now, this text is totally up to me. I could name it whatever I like, but this hashtag creates a local variable. So this is another Angular 2 template expression, so a syntax we can use in our Angular 2 templates. And Angular 2 will find this hashtag and will know that the text after this hashtag will be the name of our local variable, and this local variable will be bound to the element where Angular 2 finds it. So we can only use it within our HTML tags, so within the greater and lesser signs here. And then it is bound to the complete element. So not only to the value of this input here, not only to whatever we enter, but to the element as it's in its whole, right? So with this local variable, we will have a possibility to access this input field. And I will do it now here in my span by conditionally attaching this class when this input field here holds a value of yes. Now I'll use a built-in Angular 2 directive, which is called class, and then we have a dot followed by the name of the class we want to attach, so it's our isAwesome class. And then close all the squared brackets, and then we have an equal sign and quotation marks. And between those quotation marks, we will have the expression which will be evaluated and which will decide whether this class will be attached or not. So what this class directive does is, we started by just telling Angular 2 we want to use the class directive. Then we're using this isAwesome class here as the, well, to be attached or detached class. And then in the expression here, between the quotation marks, we tell Angular 2, well, when should you attach it and when should you not do that? Now that's a special directive here, this class directive. I will also show you another special directive in a second. Generally, Angular 2 directives don't have this configuration where you first have the name of the directive and then, like, for example here, the class name. A normal directive would just be squared brackets like just directive, right, without any dot something, right? So we will see this, and in this course we will cover a lot of directives, obviously. So in this case we're using the special class directive, which makes it really easy to attach and detach classes. And this expression will be check the input element. So this is the local variable we created here. Check its value, so dot value, we access the value of our input field. And check if it is equal to yes. And if it is yes, so if this returns true, if input element value equals yes, this will return true, then this isAwesome class will be attached. So let me save this. And now if I enter something here, nothing is changing. Why is that? Well, that is because it would be changing, but our UI isn't updated. Our UI only updates if certain events or if events are happening. So I will add an event to my input element here. We will come to add events and data binding in general in a separate section, in the next section. So I'm not going to go into detail, but in general, an event is added by using parentheses, and between the parentheses, I add the name of the event. And there are a couple of built-in events, so all the default events, like key up. And then we have, again, equal sign and quotation marks, and then between the quotation marks, the code which will be executed when this event fires. Now we don't really want to execute anything, we just want to catch this event so that the UI updates. So I will just enter a 0 here so that nothing happens, but the UI will be updated. And if I now enter yes here, you see it got red and bold. And if I write anything else, well, nothing changes. So isn't that cool? That is how you can attach a class to your document through Angular 2, to a certain part of your document. That is how easy that is. Now in the next video, we'll have a look at additional ways of manipulating our HTML document, our DOM. See you there. Bye. Hey, so in the last video we had a look at how we could conditionally attach CSS classes. We also learned how we can import style sheets into specific components with this configuration, with this metadata here. So now let's mess a little bit more with our DOM here. Let's say we want to add a button which is only enabled if we, again, have entered yes into our input field. So I will add this button here. Let me just enter several line breaks. And I'll have my button only enabled if yes was entered. So let's save this, and at the moment obviously it's always enabled. Now I will use another directive here, a so-called attribute directive, which is just a default directive with squared brackets. So we have this default, that's a standard, that's the most default way a directive can get. Squared brackets and then the name of the directive within those squared brackets. So this disable thing here is not bound to the disabled HTML attribute of our button, but it's an Angular 2 built-in directive. So just an instruction like every directive which tells Angular 2, hey, I have to disable this button if, and now here again, this expression between the quotation marks returns true. This is generally how all directives work. You have the directive name here. Then it differs if you have to use squared brackets or parentheses. For events you have parentheses, and for property binding for attribute directives, so directives where you don't get an event but change the element, you have squared brackets. And this is how you can memorize this. If you have squared brackets, then you're doing something to the element. You're changing the look of it, you're passing some value into it, whatever. You're changing the element. If you have parentheses, then we're talking about events. We're getting something from that element. We're catching some action. We're listening to an event from that element. We're not changing it. We're getting something from it. That's very important. Squared brackets, putting something into an element. Parentheses, getting something out of that element. Very, very important. That is how data binding works in Angular 2. Now here I got my disabled directive, and the expression I want to check is again if input.value equals yes, or if it is not equal to yes, then I want to disable this, right? So let me save this, and obviously this should be input element. So let me save it again. Now you can see it is disabled. Now if I enter anything, well, it's not changing, but if I enter yes, maybe it was a little bit hard to see, but I can now click it. Whereas if nothing is entered, I can't click it. So this is how we could enable and disable a button depending on the state of another element in our DOM. Now, let's say we want to change the color of our name depending on if we entered yes or not. Well, we could again use this and attach the isAwesome class, but I don't want to make it bold. Obviously, I could create a new class, but we have another shortcut directive like this class directive here, where we can directly apply a certain style. So I will again wrap this into a span element here. And then I will use this style directive here. And as the class directive, it's not kind of a classic directive, not a default attribute directive, which has this attribute style. This is where the name comes from. But instead we access the style here again with a dot, and we want to set the color. So here we can set all the CSS properties, or all the styles, how we can edit them with CSS. Important thing here, if we have a CSS element which would have a hyphen like background hyphen color, well then we would have it camel cased, so we would have background color with no hyphen, no space between, just with a capital B. So background, capital C, background, and then color, capital C. So this is how you would rename those CSS properties here, but in general, yeah, it should be easy to figure out. Here we're just setting the color, and now in this expression, well, I could just write red in single quotation marks, because this has to be a string, and now it is red. Now I want to check if I entered yes. So I will add input element dot value equals yes, also in single quotation marks, well then it should be read, otherwise nothing. So this is like a simple tertiary operator here, where we have this one line conditional check. And now you can see it is not read by default, but if I enter yes, it gets read. So we get this style directive here to quickly change the style of a certain part of our DOM. We got this class directive here to quickly attach or detach a class to a certain part of our DOM. We got this attribute directive here, where we do pass something into our button here, where we say you should either be disabled or enabled depending on whatever is entered into this input element. And this is how we play with our DOM, how we pass data, how we change it depending on what the user does, on the state of our application. And this is what we call data binding, how we basically use our data to change the DOM. And obviously we will have a lot deeper look throughout this course, but that is really the core of it. And as you can see, it is not that difficult to get. It just requires some exercise, and we will do a lot of exercise throughout this course. See you in the next videos. Bye. So we already covered a lot about components, and it's almost time to have our first little project using all that knowledge to build a little application. First, there's another thing I want to show to you, or two other things. The first thing is we're already nesting a component here. We're nesting this my component into our root component, the app component. Now let's create another component. Test component, just test component. Test.component.ts, and I will again export a class called test component, and I will let me zoom in a little bit. I will add my import, so I'll import my component from Angular 2 core, Angular 2 it should be, and I will add my decorator. So again, component, pass JavaScript object with a selector of test and a template of, well, here I'm going to use an external template HTML file so that you can see how we do that. So I will have a template URL here, and I want to lead this to, I will create a new folder for that, which I will call templates, and then let's just say test.tpl.html. That's just the way I will name it. I will create that folder now here. Directory will be templates, so it's on the root level, and then I will have a name of test.tpl.html, and here I will just have an h1 tag. This is my second component with an external HTML file. So that's that. And now this test component, I will embed it here at the bottom of my other component, of the my component, by using test, and I will have to add my directives metadata here, so an array where I then import test component, otherwise we would not be able to use it. Now let me save this. Oh, you can already see it there with an external HTML file, my second component. So this is how we use external HTML files. Instead of writing all our template like this in our TypeScript file, we can use an external file here. Now that's one thing. The other thing is back to my component here. I'm here setting my name to max. And besides the fact that I probably want to get it dynamically in a real app, or I want to be able to input it in an input field, we can do it like this, that we set up a default value, but let's try a different way of setting up a name when the component starts, but not setting it up here. So I will just delete the value and just say that this should be a string. So this is TypeScript here, that I'm setting this to type string. So it's not initialized yet, it's just, I declared this property, but it has no value as of now. Now, I could use my constructor to like say this dot name equals max. And if I save this, you can see it's still displaying max, so this would work, but I don't want to use my constructor. This has several reasons, and it's just not the best style, because yeah, it would work for this, but let's imagine we would have an operation which might take a little bit longer, then this would keep our whole component from loading just because we're waiting for this property to be set. So I will use one of the lifecycle hooks Angular 2 provides for components. These lifecycle hooks are certain events which are fired throughout the lifecycle of a component. So whenever Angular 2 creates a component, and it does this for this my component because, well, we tell it here, we need this my component, please create it, we're embedding it here. So when it creates this, it's entering certain phases. And during each phase, it gives us the opportunity to do something. So I'm interested in the onInit hook, which is fired when, well, the component is ready to load and is initialized. So I will implement this. This is an interface onInit. And make sure you import it. Import onInit from Angular 2 core. That's, as I said, the interface which needs to be imported. Now I got an error here because I'm not implementing the method this interface requires me to implement. Now, if you're not sure what interfaces are, it's generally a contract our class which implements it has to sign. So it says, okay, this interface requires every class which implements it to have certain methods or properties. And those contracts, those interfaces, are therefore used to make sure that, well, for example, certain classes can interact because they know, hey, this class implements this contract. I can safely call this method in this class because it has to have it, because this interface requires it to have it. So that's the same thing here. We're implementing onInit, and then Angular 2 knows, well, I can execute the onInit method in this component when this lifecycle hook is reached, or this phase in the lifecycle is reached, because this interface which I'm implementing here requires me to have the respective method implemented. So in this case, that's the onInit, the ng onInit method. This will be called when this component is initialized. Now there are other lifecycle phases which we're not implementing, and therefore Angular 2 will not try to call the respective methods in our component because it can't be sure that we're implementing those methods. So now this ng onInit will be called when our component is initialized, and here is the place where I will then set my name to max, and let me save this. And again, we see nothing changes, which means it still works. And now we're setting the value of this property in this place. And those lifecycle hooks will be something we will use throughout this course, and you will use all those hooks in your applications. And there are more hooks than just the onInit hook, but I have attached to this course a document which shows you all the hooks you can use and when they are kind of fired by Angular 2. Now, this is it for the basics about components, how we insert data, how we use our template expressions, how we use data binding, and yeah, we really covered a lot here. And I think it's now finally time to have our first little project to take what we learned and put it into action. See you there. Bye.